Hi, and um, welcome back to the Unlocking Black History. I'm Kevin Zimmerman of Unlocking Black History on YouTube, and I'm glad to be here live with you guys today. Um, Last week, I had to live stream or video the live stream because I wasn't physically able to be here in the chair, but I'm physically here in the chair this week, and I'm looking forward to this. I've come to learn that the more I do this, the more you receive it, the more you appreciate it, and I appreciate you as well. So this is great. Thank you guys for taking the time to come and be here with me today. We got to talk about it. We got to look at it. Of course, today's primary topic of discussion is going to be what happened last week on April the 29th when the United States Supreme Court literally gutted the Voting Rights Act of 1965. When this happened, I looked at it the night that it happened. I read it, a screen that came over my phone, and my wife saw immediately that there was a change. My wife saw immediately my disposition shifted, and she asked what was the matter. And I told her these words. I said, "Hon, I'm not sure if people really are aware of what just happened." And what I meant by that was when we talk about the Voting Rights Act, we have to talk about how it came about. We have to talk about why it came about. And then we got to take a sincere, honest look at what just happened last week. Martin Luther King Jr., Fannie Lou Hamer, and John Lewis were not the only people fighting for civil rights. Certainly, they weren't the only people involved in voting rights, but they are significant figures in pursuing Blacks in America and people of color and minority uh, having a voice where you get to take part in our diplomatic process. I remember sharing with you on a couple of live feeds a while back when I told you about my dad's statement that my dad made to me or said to me. My dad said, "Son, anything about you not represented by you is not for you." And when he said it, I told you then, I'll tell you the same thing now. When he said that, that resonated with me, that stuck with me. And as we talk about the great American experience, when we talk about the United States, when we hear phrases like, "I'm proud to be an American," we have to ask ourselves, what are we talking about here? I'm not anti American, I'm not anti America, but I am against the degree of racism that she's illustrated since the inception of this country. I'm against that. And I'm going to continuously speak out against that. I want to make it clear when I was born into this earth, when I came in the year 1960, Black people like myself did not have voting rights. Black people like myself was not allowed to take part in the diplomatic process. When I was born into the world in 1960, I was born into a world of segregation. I was born into a world of Jim Crow laws when I was born into the world. And Judge Taney made a statement in a court ruling back in the 1800s where he said, the white man has no rights that, let me rephrase it. He said, the black man has no right that the white man has to honor or respect, or something in those terms. But the black man has no rights that the white man must recognize, honor, or respect. That was back in the 1800s. But I'm concerned now. I'm concerned, not that we won't be able to reverse this, but I'm really concerned when this happened. I'm concerned about how much we as a Black race are paying attention to it. I know some of us are, because when it happened, there was a media frenzy that went out about it. I know that it is a discussion at a lot of levels, in a lot of places. But it does concern me if this is something that all of us are doing. We couldn't imagine, none of us could have imagined something as significant as this being attacked in a manner that is attacked today. And I want to rephrase that. I would rather say that this way. Not that I couldn't imagine it, because it's happened ever since the inception of our country. But I guess I would say I would like to imagine more resistance against these kind of things, to the degree that it wouldn't have made it this easy or this possible to do it. And we had a chance to do it. America just chose not to do it. It's surprising to a lot of us now, just like it was surprising to a lot of us when Roe versus Wade was rolled back. Many people could not have imagined that Roe versus Wade would be rolled back. But we have to ask the question, who is affected most by the rolling back of Roe versus Wade? And I want to put a period there, and I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to go back to this image: Dr. Martin Luther King, Fannie Lou Hamer, and John Lewis. Then we'll work our way back. Fannie Lou Hamer was beaten into an inch of her life for fighting for voting rights. She suffered permanent kidney damage, and she suffered a blood clot that impaired her vision for the rest of her life. Why did she make that kind of sacrifice? Fannie Lou Hamer made that kind of sacrifice because she believed in all men being created equal, and that we all had a right, born here in America, to take part in the diplomatic process, and no white race or anyone else had the right to deny us that opportunity. That's the sacrifice Fannie Lou Hamer made. John Lewis, known as Good Trouble. John Lewis was one of the members that led the march over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. I visited that site, and I went to that bridge, and I crossed over that bridge. And if you don't know, Edmund Pettus was a significant figure of the Confederacy. The Confederacy, of course, was a coalition of members or states in the South who fought and died for the preservation of white supremacy and the institution of chattel slavery. John Lewis led that march, and it resulted in what's been known as Bloody Sunday. And I'm specifically using these terms because I would like for you, if you're not familiar with it, to go and research every word that's coming out of my mouth so that you could see how imperative the State of the Union is right now. How imperative it is that if you were fighting, fight harder. If you are not fighting at all, start fighting. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we all know the stories. But folks, the reason he died, to put it blank, is because he was a Black man who thought he and Black people should be equal to white citizens. That's why they killed him. Who are you to disrupt America to the degree that it forces her to conform to accepting that the Black race is equal to, and in some cases, better than the white race? Everyone that you're looking at on the screen right now, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Fannie Lou Hamer, and John Lewis, fought for us to live the lives that we're living today. And I'm concerned because, yes, I know that today we have people that are in the wealthy 1%. Yes, I know today we could vote and take part in the diplomatic process. We could say that we wanted someone who represented our interests. We wanted that person to be at the table, not on the menu. Today, I know that we get six-figure jobs and we drive nice cars and we live in communities where we were once denied. I know all of that today. But we're fooling ourselves if we think that the ideology that existed when America was established has disappeared. I've shared with you for a very long time that racism doesn't go away. Racism evolves. It doesn't disappear. It changes forms. And it evolves. I'll go as far as to say this, even back then, but it's true even now. Members of the Ku Klux Klan, or not formidable members, but people that have Klan ideology, they don't wear white robes and hoods anymore. They wear nice suits, shirts, and ties. They work in our highest governmental officials, as our highest government officials. They work in our banks. They sit on our benches. They work on city councils. They make decisions that impact us. But now, guess what? It's not just men. It's men and women. Men and women. When we look at the ideology of the Confederacy, they haven't gone away. They still smile at us and live to the right and to the left of us. We transition by them every day. But let me be clear. This is not every white person in America. It is not. There are millions upon millions of people who are not Black that believe in the equality of all humanity. But we're deceiving ourselves if we don't think that there are those that still exist amongst us that deem themselves the superior race. Thus, we see things like this. Why would you roll back? Why would you roll back civil rights? And I see someone just joined us here. Hey, it says dare to search. And he's from Ohio. No, he's from Alabama, but lives in Ohio. And hey, man, welcome. I'm glad to have you on here. Thank you so much for joining. Why? We must ask ourselves this question. Why civil rights in the first place? Why did that have to happen? So then, if I shared with you that racism doesn't disappear, but it evolves, that's when I'll bring you back to what happened when we saw this, when we saw the rolling back of Roe versus Wade. And the reason I wanted to point that out is because I'm going to ask you a rhetorical question. When we saw Roe versus Wade, guess what demographic was impacted most by Roe versus Wade? And I see you. Is it Tamar Kaya? And please forgive me if I'm not saying it right, but I do see you that just came on. Thank you for joining so much. But when Roe versus Wade happened, that impacted the Black woman more than any other demographic that came about. Now, I want you to know this: it didn't impact her because she was just out here living a life unresponsibly. That is not the case. Black women were most affected because they have the highest infant mortality rate and because of economic disparities brought on by Black women living disproportionately in states with stricter abortion bans. That's why the Black woman was impacted most. It was not because she was irresponsible. It's not the case. Then we saw in January 20th and January 21st of this year, the rolling back of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We saw that happen. We saw that take place. And so when we talk about America, once again, nobody's being anti-America, but we will be and we will forever be anti-racism against Blacks in America or racism against anyone else. And you can't tell me that if you're impacting programs that primarily impact Blacks and people of color, that America is not a racist country. You're never going to be able to convince me of that one. So let's take a good look at what just happened here on April the 29th, last week. That was a stunning thing that took place. And on April the 29th, in a major ruling, the United States Supreme Court struck down a Black majority congressional district in Louisiana's map as an unconstitutional gerrymander, and it fundamentally altered the court's interpretation of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 in a 6-3 decision. That's what happened. That is exactly what happened. It says that the ruling does not erase Section 2. Now, listen to this because I want you to see the evolution of racism. It says it does not erase Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act entirely, but it effectively neuters it. The court rewrote the test used to apply Section 2 in such a way that it can only take effect as long as protected seats don't infringe on the right of the state lawmaker to draw partisan gerrymandering. Then it said for 39 years, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act had required redistricting institutions to consider racial and ethnic minority representation. Now, let me read that again. Where we say that we're not a racist nation, but for 39 years, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act had required redistricting institutions to consider racial and ethnic minority representation when devising congressional districts. Majority minority districting was required when a state had a large, compact, and cohesive minority or Black community, or a community that consisted of people of color. So this is very difficult to swallow. And hello, I see Dare Touch. I see Casey that's joined us. Casey, thank you so much for coming on today. For those of you who joined late, we are discussing the recent decision made by the Supreme Court to allow racial gerrymandering to take place in the United States. So I'm really gracious and glad that you guys have decided to join us today, because Section 2, the purpose of Section 2 was to prohibit any act regarding voting that proved to be racially motivated. That's what Section 2 was meant to do, but they just rolled that back last week. It said when Congress amended Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act in 1862, it did so specifically to ensure that the application of Section 2 would turn on the presence of discriminatory effects, not proof of intent to racially discriminate, which almost now impossibly proves racism was the issue, since the government can claim it acted on partisan reasons. In other words, what they are now saying is, what we did, you can't prove that we did that based on being racially motivated. That's what they're saying. We did it because we wanted to gain the advantage, but you can't prove that we did it because it was racially motivated. Although it clearly shows it happened in Texas, and now it just happened in Louisiana. It clearly shows that the demographic that was negatively impacted most was the demographic that had a predominant population of Blacks and people of color. But you can't prove it. That's what they're saying. You can't prove that. That was the outcome. We know that was the outcome, but you can't prove that. That's evolution. That's the evolution of voter discrimination. Some of you already know, but I wanted to put this up here for those who don't know. How does this stuff happen? I think it's important that if you didn't pay attention to how these things happen, or if you're just now getting involved and witnessing how these things happen, I want this to be here so that you can always go back to it and use it as a piece of your own resource to be able to educate or teach the next generation or someone that's recently getting involved. But racially motivated gerrymandering happens in one of two ways. It's either cracking or packing. And what you see on the left, you see the 4 equally divided squares. Each square has 2 purple dots. But as you look in each one of those squares, you see 3 green dots. So that gives them the majority, so that the person who represents the purple dots. And look at the purple dots as right now, what's happening as the Black community. And it says they can't or they cannot elect their own representation because they were outnumbered by the opposing party with the way that the map was drawn up. So they basically, they will draw up a map. Every state does it. And they can draw up a map where they could crack out the representation of Blacks and people of color to fall into areas of the district that are predominantly dominated by the other party. And so that when those Blacks or people of color make their vote will be outnumbered in the area they're in by the people of the opposing party. On the right side, you see what's called packing. And when you see the packaging redistricting, when they redraw the maps that way, when you look at that, you see that there is a dominant area in the middle. You see the 5 purple dots. You could say that represents the Black community. So we know that when they make a vote, they will believe that because of their dominance and their representation, that they can vote for the person that represents them because they're the dominant group. But when you look at what surrounds them, you look to the left and you see 5 green dots. You look to the right, you see right top corner, you see there's 3 green dots to 2. And then when you see the bottom right corner, you see 4 green dots to 1, where the opposing party is the dominant party. And so that packing, that's done with the district. So the other parties win adjacent districts, and all you win is that one area. And so you can't put your representative cannot be advanced because of that. And so I wanted to make sure that you had that in the event if you ever wanted to return back as something to help teach or show how cracking and packing works. There were 3 that dissented on that decision. It was Justice Kagan, it was Justice Sonia Sotomayor, and of course, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. And Justice Kagan wrote the dissent to that, and she wrote this: Justice Elena Kagan argued that the Supreme Court ruling, which allowed a contested Louisiana map, effectively gutting the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, will have grave consequences, I want you to hear me on this, across the South. She warned that the decision renders the Voting Rights Act all but a dead letter, is what she wrote. That decision that they made renders the Voting Rights Act all but dead. And you notice she said the key words: the act will have grave consequences across the South, because the South was a part of the Confederacy. And the Confederacy did not believe that Blacks were equal to whites. And the Confederacy also believed that they wanted to sustain or maintain the institution of slavery. We can't put it any different than that. The South, it is now believed, is going to institute these gerrymandering practices. And it's not just going to happen in the South. Actually, we know that this racism has spread all across the United States. And they're going to institute these gerrymandering practices for the purpose of attempting to give them the advantage Because why? Today's Supreme Court now says it is not against the law to do that. Racism doesn't disappear. It evolves. But I'm not going to end on that note. I got 30 seconds left. This can be fought, but we have to get off the couch. And when we vote in mass numbers, we can win. But it's not going to be quick. It's not going to be easy. It's already in effect. It's going to take time. But we cannot get weary. Not now. Not ever. If we're going to reverse this, we're going to turn this around, if not for ourselves, but for our future generation, we must not be ignorant enough to believe that although America is about to reach 250 years old, that we are not still in a fight. But it never beat us then, and we're not going to let it beat us now. Ladies and gentlemen, that's my time. Thank you for just joining me today to be up to date on what's happening regarding the plights of Blacks in America. We are going to keep pressing our way forward. And hey, the way I see it is if no one likes for us to be here, then they can leave. I'll see you next week. Take care.